Israel opens construction bids for new illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. That's despite widespread international condemnation. What's driving this land grab? And what does it mean for the future of Palestinians in an independent Palestinian state? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Illegal under international law, Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank have been expanding for decades. The right-wing government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fast-tracked the establishment of new ones. The policy aims to tighten Israel's hold on the occupied West Bank and block the creation of a contiguous Palestinian state. With just months to go until elections in October, the government has opened bids for the construction of 1,200 illegal housing units. It's also ignored international criticism of the planned settlement known as E1. Some Western countries are threatening sanctions if Israel goes ahead. But would that make a difference? We'll talk to our panel of guests in a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
This is Ma'ale Adumim. It's one of the largest illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, with around 40,000 residents. It was also one of the first, established in 1975. A decade later, more than 100 illegal settlements have been built for tens of thousands of settlers. Today there are more than 140 settlements, nearly 400 outposts, and about 750,000 Israeli settlers on Palestinian land. All settlements are illegal under international law, even if the Israeli government recognises them. Ma'ale Adumim is east of the separation wall, the Israeli-built barrier that cuts off occupied East Jerusalem from the rest of the occupied West Bank. In the 1990s, Israel proposed what's known as the E1 plan, to connect Ma'ale Adumim with occupied East Jerusalem. It entails the construction of nearly 3,500 housing units on 12 square kilometres of Palestinian land. International diplomatic pressure on Israel stalled work on the project for 3 decades, until now. On Tuesday, the Israeli government opened construction bids for 1,200 housing units. Multiple countries, including Canada, the UK, France, Qatar and Egypt, have condemned the move. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called it unacceptable, and the Belgian Foreign Minister urged the EU to take action. The UN explains what the E1 plan would mean for Palestinians.
Which would effectively sever the connection between the northern and the southern West Bank. As such, it would have severe consequences for the territorial integrity of the occupied Palestinian territory and present an existential threat to the two-state solution.
Not only does the E1 split the occupied West Bank, already fragmented by Israeli military checkpoints and illegal settlements, it would cut off East Jerusalem, the intended capital of the state of Palestine. With elections around the corner, Israel's right-wing government has fast-tracked construction plans at a rate never seen before. And at the same time, settlers have escalated their attacks on Palestinians, with support from Israeli forces. In the past, international condemnation slowed the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements, but that no longer appears to be the case. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's discuss all of this further with our guests who are joining us on today's Inside Story. And in The Hague in the Netherlands, we have Ammar Hijazi. He's head of the Palestinian mission to the Netherlands. And Alain Pinkas is former Israeli ambassador and consul general in New York. He joins us from Tel Aviv. 2 ambassadors today. I'm going to use first names, though, on this discussion, Ammar. I've been covering your region for a large part of my career for more years than I'd like to count. And I've been covering settlements for all of that time. But the settlement that we're going to focus on at the beginning of this discussion is a special one, the E1 settlement. Some call it the Doomsday Settlement. Why?
This settlement basically destroys any future chances for Palestinian independence and Palestinian state and the right of Palestinian people to self-determination by completely cutting the West Bank into two separate halves in the north and the west and then the south from the middle, but also by severing East Jerusalem from the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. And it comes in the heels of a widespread campaign of terror and destruction that is financed, supported by the Israeli government, which is hacking everywhere in the occupied Palestinian territory, including the current situation that we have been witnessing for a few days in Qusra and elsewhere in the West Bank.
Alain, the E1 it's called, it actually stands for East 1 from old Israeli planning maps. And old, I think, is important here because the original plans for a settlement go back to 1991 when Yitzhak Shamir was the prime minister. Israeli prime ministers have dreamed of a settlement on this territory for a very long time, but they've never done it before. Why?
Well, I'm not sure, James, that it's going to be done here in this case as well, because I think it is more relevant or more attuned to the upcoming election, and it's more rhetorical than it is practical, even though I think that everything that Ambassador Hijazi said is correct, and I agree with him. Now, as for your question, why? Because this settlement, and I concur again with Ammar here, this settlement basically not only dissects the West Bank, it creates complete discontiguity, meaning that a future Palestinian state, any way you envisage, how it'll be structured, has to have some contiguity between its northern part, basically Samaria, and its southern part. The middle is right where E1 is, a roughly 12 square kilometer area east or northeast of the city of Jerusalem, of East Jerusalem to be specific. And if indeed it is built to the east of that is a ridge of mountains, meaning that there will be no real contiguity between the northern part of the West Bank and the southern part of the West Bank. This has been, going back specifically to your question, James, this has been a dream of several Israeli prime ministers to create an irreversible geographical, topographical, demographic reality in which a Palestinian state is no longer viable.
Ammar, if you look who lives there, the estimates I've seen is 3,700 Palestinians, most of them of Bedouin origin. And some of these people have been displaced before. In fact, if they're kicked out, some of them will have been displaced 3 times.
That's true. But again, I mean, the whole situation is unnatural in the West Bank and all in the whole occupied Palestinian territory. Israel has been controlling since its occupation the movement and the expansion of communities within the occupied Palestinian territory, i.e., I mean, had there been no occupation, there would have been most probably hundreds of thousands of people already living there. The problem is that this is an engineered situation by which Israel has isolated this area and denied any possibility for Palestinians to utilize their land, to move into that area, or to expand further, and for the Palestinian state to implement projects and strategic projects in any area in the occupied Palestinian territory, whereby most of the population is concentrated in city centers, and those who are now attacked in the villages are left alone to face their fate. And it was meant to be like that all during the occupation years. This has been engineered by a set of colonial policies that were in place and that denied the Palestinians to be living in their land freely, expanding and using their lands. So the natural situation, it's an unnatural situation that is dictated by a set of policies that leads to this very limited level of population, including the Bedouin communities that you have referred to, that are now unable to move and live their lifestyle in their own areas, and that are having their herds stolen or even poisoned or killed by Israeli settlers on daily raids and daily terror attacks that we are witnessing and that are being filmed and portrayed by Al Jazeera and others.
Alain, I've been looking at quotes from key Israeli figures on E1, and it's very interesting that what some of these people say to the Israeli media in Hebrew is not really what they're saying in English. Benjamin Netanyahu, just over a year ago, or nearly a year ago, in fact, there'll be no Palestinian state, this place is ours. And he was talking about E1. And also Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who also has a defense ministry role with regard to the West Bank. The project will bury the idea of a Palestinian state because there'll be nothing to recognize and no one to recognise. Do you think the international community are taking note of those sort of comments?
Yeah, I mean, the international community has been taking note of this since 1967, and certainly since the Oslo process in the early 90s, in 1993 and onwards, was launched, and then essentially collapsed. The question is, what will the international community do? And that brings us to a bigger question or a broader perspective. Look, a Palestinian state is extraordinarily an unpopular concept in Israel. There are three reasons. We don't have time to delve into that, but there are three essential reasons. One is that Israelis feel that after October 7th, a Palestinian state would pose a grave danger to Israel in a very broad or wide border area. The second is that a Palestinian state, negotiations over a Palestinian state have failed until now. The third is that none of the opposition parties, none of the Israeli opposition parties have come up to the Israeli public and explained the benefits of a Palestinian state, the modalities of a Palestinian state. So everyone is saying, okay, the Palestinian, like those two quotes from Netanyahu and from Smotrich, they're saying, okay, there will never be a Palestinian state. Fine. But here is where we are all marinated or immersed in a horrible, tragic cycle. If not a Palestinian state, then what? Because let's say that you even embrace what Netanyahu and Smotrich did, which I never will, but nonetheless, for the sake of our conversation, this leads to a one-state reality. I don't know that 99% of Israelis understand, fully grasp what the meaning of a binational state or a one geopolitical unit. That is catastrophic, by the way, for both sides. And so this settlement, we can dissect it and we can, go into the details of the damages it would potentially cause. But the mere idea that no one is coming up with a meaningful, a robust solution. By the way, there are other solutions other than the ones about two states living side by side according to the Oslo process. There are other modalities, there are other creative ideas, but you see and you hear none of them in Israel, nor on the Palestinian side. So we're all in this cycle. Look, I don't think, James, that this settlement block will be built. And even if it is built, there are ways around it if there is goodwill and political motivation for a two-state model, a two-state solution. However, I just don't see that right now in Israel.
Ammar, let me bring you in on that idea that this is not actually going to happen, that it's an election ploy maybe to gain votes ahead of the Israeli election on the 27th of October. That's one way you could look at it. But the other way is perhaps they're trying to get something locked in before the election when a new government might be forced to back down by the international community.
In my opinion, the unabashed way that the Israeli government has been expressing itself and the things that nobody would have imagined would happen, including the death sentence, for example, the genocide in Gaza, the widespread terrorism by settlers, I mean, there is a lot of debate within Israel about these things, but they did happen at the end of the day, and they were imposed in spite of their negative even effect on Israel's image internationally. So I doubt that this government will not go ahead with this enterprise as it has been doing. Already we have tens of declarations that were announced prior to this latest announcement. And I think this is the election campaign in which both Smotrich, Netanyahu, and Ben-Gvir and all the other right-wingers are agreeing on, and this is what they got beforehand in order to unite in the upcoming elections. Yes, it's going to benefit them in elections, but I think it will be further implemented. And the reason that this is being further encouraged is that most of the time, international community has sufficed with condemnation statements and stern statements, and did not live up to their legal obligations under international law to face and exact a price on this kind of conduct that was supposed to start with the first settlement that started in 1967 and onwards. And this is why Israel has been escaping any kind of accountability. Therefore, that kind of conduct allowed for this expansion to carry on, this behavior to go further. We already have 700,000 plus settlers living in the occupied territory, with the exemption of the ones in East Jerusalem. And you know, already there is a problem, a big problem that the international community has been aware of much early and knew that they had to do something about it.
Some might say this government has been involved in settlement building, which we must state is illegal, on steroids. When you look at the figures of the number of settlements that have been approved by this government in nearly the last 4 years, there's a huge increase in the speed of these approval of settlements. I have some figures from Peace Now here saying that from 1967, when the West Bank was occupied, until 2022, that's 55 years. I happen to be born in 1967. There were 127 settlements approved. In the last 4 years, it's 104.
Yeah, well, okay. A lot of that is fictitious. I don't like the policy. Don't misunderstand me. I think the government is playing with fire here and mortgaging Israel's future and any kind of coexistence with the Palestinians. However, that being established, about 90 of those 104 settlements are not real. What they do is you have 6 caravans with 6 families. They split into 2, moving 50 yards away or 50 meters away, and they call it a new settlements. Demographically, James, and again, I'm not condoning the settlement activity. I opposed it for many years, but the fact here matters. If you look at, first of all, demographically, there is a net negative migration, meaning more people are leaving the West Bank than people going into the West Bank. Of the 700,000 settlers that Ammar quoted, which is a correct figure, about 500,000 live on the so-called seam line, the imaginary green line, meaning that in any agreement between Israel, any future agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, those areas will be incorporated into Israel in exchange or in compensation with land swaps for the Palestinians. So we're basically looking at 150 to 200,000 people. Of those new settlements, it's just a few hundred people. And again, I'm not defending this, far from it. I think it's a bad policy. I think it's myopic. I think it's insightful with a C, not an S-I-G-H. But in terms of the demographic, it changes nothing. E1, which is the original topic of our conversation here today, James, E1, if built, and I still doubt that it will, certainly before the election, which is 72 days away. But E1 potentially is a game changer in that it divides or cuts the West Bank into 2.
Alain, I mean, at the same time as this increase in settlement building, you have the violence from settlers on the West Bank, which is increasing a great deal according to the UN figures. You have a financial squeeze on the Palestinians by Israel, not paying the money, the taxation money they should. There are those that say this is all one project, annexation and eventually erasure of the idea of Palestine. Do you agree with that? Is that what this government wants?
Yeah, that is what this government wants, which is why I've always objected to this artificial distinction between Mr. Netanyahu and the right-wing members of his coalition. He is just as extreme right-wing as they are. There is absolutely no daylight, perhaps the music, perhaps the choice of words, but practically and substantively, there's no difference between Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Mr. Ben-Gvir, all three names that have been mentioned in the last few minutes. Yes, they want annexation, but look at this. Look at a peculiar fact. They haven't annexed anything. Now, they haven't annexed anything, A, because they know it is not popular in Israel, and B, because they know the world would condemn it, including the U.S. and including Trump's U.S. I doubt that the world will tolerate an Israeli annexation, certainly on a large scale. As for the erasure of the Palestinian people or the concept of a Palestinian state, I go back to what we discussed a few moments ago, James. Okay, fine, I'll take it. You know, this is what you believe in. Let's say it's legitimate. What is your alternative? There are 15 million people between the Jordan River in the east, and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. 15 million people. If you annex, you need to enfranchise. If you enfranchise, there's a Palestinian majority, meaning that the next Prime Minister of Israel, conceivably, could be a Palestinian Arab. So you ask Israelis that, and they say, oh, no, we will not enfranchise them. Well, if you don't enfranchise them in the context of annexation and a binational state, then it's called apartheid. And face the consequences of that word, that term, and that reality. And I am afraid that this project that you described, that the Israeli government is intent. Look, I don't think that this government will stay in power. We will very likely, James, have a different prime minister come December, let's say January 2027, 4 months from now. What that new government, what that new prime minister will do in terms of reversing what this government has done is going to be the big challenge.
Ammar, what do you make of the international reaction, not just to settlements, but there are so many other issues, what Israel is doing in Gaza, what Israel is doing in Syria, what Israel is doing in Lebanon, the squeeze it's putting on the Palestinian Authority financially. Are you happy that your, particularly European partners, are standing up for the Palestinians? I notice in the country that you are the ambassador to, the Netherlands, a much stronger position.
There is certainly a movement there. It is because of the public pressure that has been applied on all of these governments in the West and elsewhere, because they have activated democratic processes to force the hand of the governments, but also the legal processes at the international level, including the ICJ advisory opinion, which had made it abundantly clear to everyone that this occupation is unlawful and it needs to be brought to an end, and any kind of support to that is not acceptable. And this is why many governments are now basing their actions on these, but much, much, much more needs to be done. This is
Ammar,
very little, very late.
So on our subject of the E1, I mean, the E1 is one settlement, and they've issued a statement and come up with words, but they're supposed to be objecting to all settlements. All settlements are supposed to be removed. Are they being tough enough? Particularly, you're there in the European Union. There's something called the EU-Israel Association Agreement. If they were to pull out of that, that would be tough action, not what they're doing now.
This is actually what the EU have said earlier in 2013, 2014, I think. in a clear statement by which they have a stern warning to the Israeli side that if they go ahead with the E1 settlement, this will happen. And I think the dynamics will change following this announcement. We saw strong statements, but this needs to be followed by action. Unfortunately, within the EU, few countries that are close to, including Hungary, Czechia, and Germany in certain instances, have been disrupting such a consensus position towards that.
And Ammar, how do you change that? Is it a question of the Palestinians trying to encourage young people and public opinion in those countries to speak up even more?
You change that by several means, but I think now we have reached the level whereby the public opinion have said its word. Independent individuals and several others have conveyed to the governments the graveness of what's happening. But now legal action is due against those governments who do not take action. So more litigation at the international, European, and national level is required. And this is something that we are looking at very seriously when it comes to these issues, so that to force the hands of the government, especially those who are not moving forward. The Netherlands is a very good example in this regard, by which several litigations took place, but also the government moved forward in relation to settlement products, whereby they have announced a step towards not allowing settlement products, to trade in settlement products, and also holding accountable those who try to violate that ban.
So, Alain, let me bring in Alain on those points you've made. Do you think the current Israeli government cares about European condemnation? Because the day the E1 tender was published was the same day as the Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir posted in front of pictures of gallows, because there's now a death penalty for Palestinians, not for Israelis, and the same day that Israel bombed Syria. Do you think that they actually care anymore what Europeans say and the condemnation that comes from them? Briefly, please.
No, they don't care. And in fact, it's the exact opposite. These condemnations allow this particular government to claim one of its trademark arguments. Oh, the world is against us. Everyone is anti-Semitic. There's an anti-Israel atmosphere and environment. They all hate us. There are demonstrations in Barcelona and demonstrations in Dublin, and the Dutch and the Swedish and the Italians. The thing is, as long as it is confined to rhetoric and hollow condemnations, whether parliaments or foreign ministries throughout the European Union, the Israeli government doesn't care.
Alan, thank you very much indeed. Alain Pinkas and Ammar Hijazi, ambassadors, thank you for joining us for the very latest on this story. Stay with Al Jazeera from reports from our teams in the occupied West Bank. And you can find further analysis at aljazeera.com. We'd like, as ever, to hear your opinion. Go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or find us on X, where our username is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, James Bays, and the team here in Doha. Stay tuned for the latest news. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment.